So the SEA ordinance, expanded SEA ordinance that the mitigation measure calls for, will regulate modest property improvements. Permits and site assessments will be required with fees attached for example, vegetation. Well, these are actually, this is verbatim out of the SEIR and the mitigation measure language. Vegetation clearing, increase of impermeable area. So that means building a patio, a driveway, adding a carport roof, or results in exposed soil. So these are examples of simple projects that would require permits or assessments within the SCA setback per this expanded ordinance that's being proposed in the mitigation measure. That is intended, that setback area is intended to protect the stream channel, the water quality and functions, fish and wildlife habitat. The fish aren't the only ones that live in the streams. Their food does. Birds use it as corridors for movement, and other animals use it for protection. So this is a graphic that basically gives you easy to read idea of if you have what is called in the countywide plan woody riparian vegetation, so not just grasses and small things like that, but herbaceous shrubs and trees. If you have vegetation along your stream, the SEA setback is going to be 50 feet landward of that outer edge of that vegetation, or 100 feet from the top of the bank, which is the top of generally your high flow creek bank. And so depending on your lot size, I know the lot that I own that has a stream behind it, even though it's a perennial stream, my entire lot would be within the SEA area. So that has some real implications for being able to do some simple things on the property without getting into a lot of permit situations and conditions that are going to be described in the SEA ordinance that's coming up. Clearing vegetation and leveling an area, for example, for a child's play equipment, for a hot tub, for a garden bed, installing a paved driveway or a patio, installation of a French drain or a swale because you're changing your surface flow condition. That's one of the triggers of what the permit may be triggered by. So we urge you to make your voice heard. The comment period, the public comment period ends June 15th, 4 p.m. The county needs to receive your comments by email or by letter. Coming up, this is very important, on May 22nd, Monday at 1 p.m., County Planning Commission hearing that is being held specifically to hear public comment on the adequacy of the SEIR, the draft SEIR, which is what we're talking about tonight. That's the way it's phrased in the county's billing, the adequacy of the document. That's going to be room 328 in the admin building, 1 p.m. on the 22nd. That's also on the single page handout here. So read the SER, send comments to the county. You've got this extra handout that tells you everything you need to know about how to do that. The process looking ahead, public comments will be incorporated. What I've been told by county staff is possibly 3 months, depending on the volume of comments that are received and the complexity of what's involved for the consultant and the county to answer those questions. They have to go through that process. That will actually be incorporated in writing in an appendix in the final draft of the SEIR, and then that will be issued for final, I believe a final public comment there. Is that right, Christina? Oh. Yeah. Or Tom.
So after the final supplement PR should be 14-day public comment period.
Right. Okay.
Before is heard again by the planning commission and then before final certification.
Great. Thank you. So Tom clarified. Oh, yes.
Well, I just want to say that every single public comment must be responded to.
Mm-hmm.
So take it seriously.
Yeah.
And do take a look at the EIR. And if you have something to say about it, I come to the meeting. SCIR, and by law, it must be responded to. So this is your opportunity to participate in the process and make your concerns known. And we should do that. We all should do that. It's participating in the process.
The draft after the 14-day public comment period will go to the Board of Supervisors for final adoption and approval. The final SCIR, that'll then become officially part of the 2007 countywide plan. The county will be able to close their obligations with this lawsuit that they've been working on now for quite a while, 10 years. And then the next step, and this is very important, the reason why this, you might be thinking this is supplementing a 2007 countywide plan, which is already quite old. The county has an upcoming plan to start in on an update, a new update to the countywide plan in 2018. And you might be thinking, well, this is supplementing something in 2007. It's going to kind of get closed out. The lawsuit's going to get closed out, and the county will be able to move forward. The reason it's important is because the mitigation measures that this EIR, supplemental EIR, calls for, especially the expanded stream conservation area ordinance, is going to be the next thing that happens along with the 2018 countywide plan update. So that SCA ordinance process that will apply only to our valley is going to be another big round of yes, Tom.
I'm sorry, you're correct. The
Okay.
SCA ordinance is not just for the valley.
So the 2013 got dropped for the entire county, because I thought originally it was dropped only for San Geronimo. Okay.
2013 ordinance applied countywide.
Right, originally, yeah, and then it was challenged. Well, there was,
The challenge really only applied to the valley.
yeah,
So the ordinance, that lack of better terms of until that basically went away following the pursuit.
right, right.
So the applicability of that ordinance, the rest of the county applicable.
Okay, thanks for clarifying. So the new expanded stream conservation area ordinance effort will be applied to the countywide, but because this SEIR is specifically looking at cumulative impacts to salmon in San Geronimo, we can assume that the new round of SCA process, there's going to be push from groups like SPAWN and other conservation groups to make a lot of the provisions of the ordinance that apply to areas or streams with salmon to be that much more intensive. And I'll talk a little bit more about why that is. So, some key points to consider about the SAR, and have these written down in this 5-page handout. The SEIR acknowledges it is difficult to predict and make direct links to impacts from development on stream conditions, so predictions are, quote, potentially overestimated. And the way that that full text reads, and this is page 5-2 of the draft SEIR, the cumulative impact analysis implicitly acknowledges the difficulties of showing direct links between land use activities and conditions. And so the predictions of impacts are of necessity qualitative and conservative, i.e. potentially overestimated. So that's really interesting when you start to think about this SEIR, Stillwater Sciences, that has created this document, is basically admitting that it's very difficult to link potential development activities to direct impacts on salmon and streams. And so when we get to the point of an SCA ordinance, this kind of statement in the SER is going to factor into how robust that ordinance maybe should be based on the science and what's stated here. The other key point we think you should think about is that it acknowledges estimates of buildable parcels in the San Geronimo Valley are also overstated. So the report study looked at all the potential lots that could be built on, and they assumed a certain average square footage of structure and a certain amount of new driveway or impermeable surface, roof, what have you, and they assigned that to all those different lots and said, well, that's the number that we're coming up with for our buildable area and our buildable parcels and units. And they, in another part of the report, or in the same section of the report, they discuss that they again admit that they're unable to assess at the detail of lot by lot, but it's been, our contention as the stewards for a long time, knowing what we know about topography in the valley, about areas with bad soils for septic, high groundwater tables, bedrock really close to the surface, you could never put a septic system there, or just pure inaccessibility, you couldn't even get a driveway or a road there. The report even mentions these factors, other factors like, that would drive up the cost of construction to where it wouldn't even make sense to try to build on that parcel. Those things were not addressed, and they didn't take those factors into consideration when they were counting the number of parcels that could be built on. So I thought it was valuable that we just point that out. And again, the SEA ordinance, the new SEA ordinance will rely on this SEIR as a basis for crafting the new regulations in this expanded ordinance that's coming up. And interestingly, about 80% of the valley land that is publicly owned open space, that's MNWD, that's public utility, that's public works or specially zoned, is going to probably be exempt from that ordinance. So that leaves the rest of the 20%, largely a lot of us that own small size lots in residential areas, that are going to be the ones who are affected and are going to need to comply with whatever the ordinance ends up coming out with. Closing thoughts, read the report, send your comments to the county, educate yourself around issues. We believe that an informed community is better empowered for decision-making in partnership with our elected officials, and an informed community is better able to be stewards of our individual and common resources. And important county efforts around the corner, get involved when they happen. This is a quote from Aldo Leopold that I had found several years ago in the 2013 process. It reads, "We seem ultimately always thrown back on individual ethics as the basis of land conservation. It is hard to make a man by pressure of law or money do a thing which does not spring naturally from his own personal sense of right or wrong." Just something to think about that I thought was nice to end with. Thank you, and we're going to start some question and answer. And just one more thing I wanted to add about being stewards of our individual and our common resources. For those of you that live along streams, have a stream as part of your property, there's a lot of great resources out there. County has a program called Mixed Stop, and they have a great booklet called Creek Care. We have an example of that booklet up at the front, and it's specifically for homeowners to do things that will help the creek, protect the creek, improve creek habitat at your home scale level. There's another great publication by Marin Resource Conservation District, the RCD. Some of you may know Sarah Phillips. She works in the community quite a bit. It's called Groundwork, and it's how to do small-scale erosion control for homeowners and small property owners. And both of those documents even have listings of lots of other great resources for native plants and other ways that you can help your own property, you can help the habitat. So we will take some questions if people could. Anybody else have questions?
Oh, yeah.
Thank you, Cole. That was very well done. All right, we're going to open it up now for questions and comments. You can come up here and Jay will help hold the microphone for you, or you can raise your hand and he'll bring it to you. Anyone? Dorothy, Jay?
All this has been going on for a while, but we have such a new project being pushed forward by the county that you haven't even mentioned. And we who live in Woodacre along the creek are finding ourselves being told that they're going to put a sewer line in at great cost to us. And whatever they find in the creek, we who live next to the creek are responsible for it. So you guys haven't responded to that particular urgency, because the price of, well, for one thing, I live on Railroad. No, I live on Redwood Avenue, and it's such an unstable road that the idea of putting a sewer down that road is really scary. The other is that we creek dwellers, again, would take all the brunt of anything that the county decided to do in terms of sewers.
Is there a question?
Question. Are stewards getting involved in that? And are you going to, I mean, the SEIR is important in that connection.
So, can I speak to that? The reason we haven't specifically, I think you're referring to the wastewater project.
Yes, absolutely.
That project has its own draft EIR out right now for public comment. I believe, I'm not sure if the public comment's still open. But the reason we're not talking about that specifically tonight is because this is specifically about the SEIR that applies to the 2007 countywide plan. That was really, the county is addressing it only from the aspect of what the court mandated the county include in that SEIR, which are the cumulative impacts to salmon. The wastewater project has come a long way more recently, and they have their own separate process going. And I can't speak to that because I'm not part of that team. We're familiar with it, and they have a group. Lisa Cross has been involved, Supervisor Kinsey's former aide. She's been quite involved in that process, and they have had their own meetings. In fact, I attended one here, I think 2 years ago. So it's not part of the topic tonight, which is why it's not being addressed by this SEIR specifically because of, this SEIR was really limited by what the court asked the county to do.
There's two SEIRs going on? I mean, I just read the one.
There's this one that we're talking about tonight. There might be other. I don't think there's any other supplemental SEIRs that supplement the 2007 countywide plan. No, Tom. Correct.
We've initiated the EIR work on that. The draft has not been released.
Oh, not.
In fact, there was a scoping session. There was a scoping session out in the community not too long ago to take comments on issues to study. So when the draft comes out, there will be opportunity, much like this, there will be opportunity to provide comments to the county on the adequacy of that draft EIR. So that process is trailing this process.
So it's upcoming.
It's upcoming.
There will be an upcoming comment period for consultants to weigh in on that proposed project.
Thank you. My name is Kristen Anderson. I live in Woodacre. I've been a part of that San Geronimo Flats and Woodacre wastewater project. I first of all want to thank the stewards for their support and their common sense approach to this process, as well as the process of studying various options for the wastewater. And no, there's not a plan to put a sewer down Redwood Avenue. That's not true. There are many options that are being looked at, and they're being studied in a concurrent EIR that is going on right now. I'm also puzzled by the fact that the Stillwater Group rolled the 1994 Salmon Enhancement Program into this plan because that the original one that did address broken septic systems with regard to the health of the water in the creek. So I'm wondering where that's going to come in, because eventually they're both going to interface. Thank you.
In the back.
Hello. Previously, this was listed as a concern a couple of years ago, and I'm wondering if the stewards are going to take any position about compliance with state and your insurance company's requirements regarding vegetation removal, tree trimming, vegetation cut down, which the fire department enforces the state law, but your insurance company can come on top of that and say, well, that's nice if that's in compliance with the Uniform Fire Code, however, we still want that bear that distance. Is that going to be brought up, or will we just have to apply for a permit every year and hire a biologist every year to get clearance to make sure our trees beyond a certain diameter are trimmed 10 feet up, and oh my God, there's a sprout, and cutting down things below the level that they have to be cut 100 feet from your house. So if your house is like yours, 100 feet extends through all your property, whether it's a stream or not. And that's where the rubber meets the road. Nobody's had a good answer about it.
Yeah, that's a good point. I can't speak for what the county's going to do about that apparent conflict in regulations. Maybe Tom can say more, but I do know that there's current language in the proposed SEA ordinance that would prohibit, that would allow vegetation clearing if it poses an immediate hazard to a structure or for fire hazard control. I don't know, that's a good point because it's not really discussed in the SEIR, and it's something that you should provide a comment to the county about. And
to add to that, part of the conflict is a downed tree. Part of the problem with a downed tree, which I understand is great for the salmon, is also generally prohibited by your insurance company and by the fire as woody debris that is higher than 3 inches tall within 100 feet of your property. And I don't know about other people here, but I know a couple of insurance companies last year and this year went around and they inspected every piece of property they owned insurance policies on in the state to make sure you're in compliance. Our property out here was inspected last year and again this year. Property in Albany and Berkeley, they were both inspected once, except a second inspection to make sure the tree branches that they called were cut off. And the property that backs up to, a couple of 100 miles or hundreds of square miles of national forest was inspected once, but out there it was twice. And they told us specifically we had to clear down to bare soil and do some other changes on the property.
okay, well, I think those are really good points, and I think it's going to be really important when this new expanded stream conservation area ordinance process gets going. Everything all right? When that process gets going with the county, that's going to be a great time to bring up those conflicts of goals. Stream protection and fire protection.
In reading this, there's 358 possible units to be developed. And as we all know, anybody that tries to build in the valley is so constricted by, first of all, the slope ordinance, and, but more importantly, the septic ordinance. Is there a list of these parcels, and is there anybody that's going to sit down and go through them and realize what's realistically going to be developed in terms of size and zoning and all that kind of stuff? Because this is going to make it much worse. And the other comment I have is, how are we responsible, aside from this comment about the insurance, how are we responsible for the woody debris that's going to be used to provide shelter for the salmon to overwinter and to not be washed away by the heavy winter stream flows? It seems like there's some built-in biases against the human beings that live here.
there is a list of the developable parcels. There is also the map in the SEIR. But I think you bring up a good point, because I had a line in one of the slides that after I read those statements that come out of the SAR about the uncertainty of the science, or the uncertainty of the data, it's the uncertainty leads to conservatism is the line I put in there. And I think the thing that we all need to think about, and you need to think about when you're going to be making comments to the county, is because there's an admitted uncertainty by Stillwater, who did this report, and they're saying because of that difficulty in predicting impacts, we are out of necessity, we're overinflating the things that we're prescribing, or we're overinflating the numbers for which we say are buildable parcels or whatever. So there was a question about how that can impact, potentially negatively. Some people might look at that and say, well, that's even more reason to have more robust measures in a new conservation area ordinance, because we can't exactly predict the impacts, but we need to be on the safe side because we're dealing with an endangered species, right? I can see that argument coming down the pipe. But the flip side of that is, and to Mrs.'s point, is why weren't the parcels looked at just a little bit closer? There's only 358 of them. You could take a USGS soils map and do a quick overlay and probably knock out a section of them just on the basis of they probably don't have good soils for septic. Remove those. Now you can go through a process. You could even, not going down to the level of visiting every parcel, but there could be some middle ground there that tries to get at a more accurate number of what's really more realistic for these things that the report even cites as issues with their predictions of buildable parcels, like the septic, like the access, like the topography. So that's, yes, sir.
So I'm trying to get clarity. You said that 80% of the land, because it's public land, Golden Gate Neckar, Rachel area, watershed, it's some reason 80% of the land not affected.
Right, public open space, public utility, MMWD,
right,
specially zoned. I don't know if Spirit Rock is going to be subject to that. Yeah.
Just to clarify, public agencies do need to comply. The only exemptions are for federal activities, certain activities of certain state agencies, and activities of the county. When we dealt with this in 2013, the county committed to walk the talk. So even though the zoning code has a general exemption that the county doesn't regulate ourselves by issuing ourselves a permit, we will subscribe to the best management practices and honor what we would ask our residents to do. But other than that, special districts need to comply. The water district is subject to compliance with county permit requirements.
Any other comments? Yeah.
I was just going to say, and maybe my name is Steve, I live in Forest Knolls, I've been the steward for quite a while, and as you talk about the number of houses, I think maybe if you just talk about impervious areas that are like roads and rooftops and driveways, it kind of makes the perspective easier to understand. So the future development in the valley, if I understand it correctly, if all these properties were developed, and they know that many of them wouldn't be able to be developed, that it would be somewhere around 14.5 acres of impervious surface. So if you built them all out, it would equal a 14.5 acre piece of asphalt. In the SCA, which is what the Streamside Conservation Ordinance is going to regulate, it's 3 acres. So everything we're going through, and all the time we're going to spend, and all the time we've already spent, is going to be about 3 acres of impervious surface in the Streamside Conservation Area. So that ordinance that we already went through is something that some of us have experience with. We're going to end up going through it again. But I would say, and I did read it, that this has some good information in it, the new SEIR. There's also some interesting information, and there's also some pretty odd information. you know, and if you don't have context of the other studies, sometimes it's hard to pick that out. But for those of us who do, you know, we'll be commenting on that. But there's some really good stuff that's happened, and that we've heard about that's not in the SEIR. Like, you know, they talk about sediment affecting fish and how they emerge out of the gravel beds. Well, if there's a lot of silt in the gravel beds, that constrains their movement out of those gravel beds. But recently, MMWD noted at the Technical Advisory Committee that our watershed, our creeks, have one of the highest rates of emergence of any stream or creek in California. We also have, this is also in MMWD, one of the highest rates of return of fish coming back from the ocean to our watershed of any creek in California. And there's some other stuff too. You know, we now have better information about the tributaries versus the main stem. You know, the previous studies didn't really kind of deal with the creeks well. And so now there's some more information in here that helps you better understand the difference. And that's good information for people who live in the valley, because it gives you a little bit more to digest as you're grappling with this if you try to read it. But there's some other stuff in the salmon enhancement plan, and I'll be done in a second. There's a note in there that scientists working in the watershed thought it would be challenging to ever see 14,800 smolt. That's the fish going out to the ocean. They thought it would be challenging to ever see that in our valley. Well, just over 3 years ago, we had 18,000 smolt that went out. So there are good things that can happen and have happened. And I think that we have to start acknowledging those good things that have happened, you know, recognizing that the watershed is functioning. There are times when it's good, there's times when it's not as good, but that overall it's doing its job. Fish are coming back, they are spawning. When the fish do come back from the ocean, and all of the scientists that work at the federal level, state level, in the county, and all the NGOs, they all know how many fish there are. They count them 3 times a year. So they know when the fish go out and when they don't come back. They don't tell you that, but they know it. And they know that what's happening in the ocean doesn't allow them to come back.
Please.
One suggestion. I'm not going to do it, and I also know it's a two-edged sword, but a suggestion about the undeveloped parcels. If we can identify, we being the stewards, identify the parcels that basically are unbuildable financially or physically, with that list, somebody owns them, somebody's paying property tax on them, and those parcels have a relatively low market value because of that, they would be perfect to be purchased by spawn, by the county, by other groups to buy them at a reasonable price for what they're worth. When I said it's a double-edged sword, there may be some fool out there that wants to go Half Moon Bay and say, hey, look, I lost my development rights because of these lists of ordinances, but I doubt in this valley we're going to run into those people. They're going to realize, if my lot's like this, I'm not going to be able to build the house, and if I do, I won't be able to even put a pot to piss in, let alone a step.
That actually is being done. What is the name of the organization who has taken, Community Land Trust, has taken possession of a number of lots for that reason? But we haven't done the analysis of the whole 358 parcels to see which ones are eligible. That's a good suggestion.
They did that like Coho, those moratorium, and they were offering parcel owners reasonable prices to sell your property rather than not for prices.
Somebody making notes of these back there? Okay, good. Thank you. All right.
Because if it was Forest Service, they would buy it and they'd use it for trading. That doesn't apply here because we got to know a lot about our own business.
Thank you. Somebody over here was there? Oh, yes, sir.
My name's Andrew. I live in Forest Knolls. I'm also an architect. I've done some projects in the valley. So I just wanted to put that out there as my perspective. In terms of the conservatism you talked about, that's in the report. There's also this bent on minimizing burdens that what they're proposing for the SCA is going to impose on like every project. Because it says right here that that there are relatively few parcels small enough to lack significant flexibility in development placement. And it goes on to basically say that it's easy enough to deal with these measures. And, you know, from the projects I've had to deal with, when you get through with the topography and finding a leach field big enough or going to an alternative system and the setbacks that are required, you end up with like almost no vulnerable area, and there's no room to maneuver a project and respect all of the requirements. And so I guess my question is, how do like the idea of imposing the SCA balance against maybe other countywide objectives like the affordability of housing like in the valley? Because doing a you pointed out that like a hot tub or a garden is going to require an environmental assessment, right? And nobody's going to do it at that point. And like our property values and the housing stock and just the viability of living out here is just going to decline further than it is now. So
these are the comments that we want to address
yes.
at next week's meeting and get into the SCA, to the SCIR
Yep.
document, if possible. And we urge you to follow through with that.
And again, thank you for those comments. I think that it's important to point out that we're calling out what the language is in the SAR, what it's proposing under that mitigation measure for the expanded SCA ordinance or the SCA setback. Where the rubber hits the road is when that process actually gets going and we see what kind of provisions and exemptions are possibly going to be adopted in there, even in a draft form. Because we knew the last time around, Spawn and some other groups were really fighting to get rid of any exemptions or even some modest projects. So I think it really comes down to, again, the importance of when that process starts up. Thank you.
Anyone else here? Yes, sir.
Just a couple of questions wrapped up in one. What about buildings that are already built within the SCA? What happens to them when they get burned down or something happens to them? Do they get rebuilt?
Tom, do you have an answer to that question? The question is, what happens if a building in the SCA burns? Can you rebuild?
You know, you're talking about something that we're going to address with our expanded SCA ordinance. You know, the philosophy is if it's there, if it's legally there and it gets destroyed, we want to work with you to allow you to rebuild it. That's the general philosophy, but I can't speak for an ordinance that we have not drafted yet, much less gone through the public process.
That's a good answer. In other words, we'll adopt the ordinance and then we'll figure out how we're going to implement it.
No, the answer is, we'll adopt the ordinance and then you'll find out whether that's in it or not.
Okay.
So I recommend that you get to the meeting or get your comments into the SCIR, into the county, and say that this is a concern of yours and you'd like to see it addressed in the SCA.
Okay. Then the second question is, a lot of these parcels, when they say there's 358 vacant lots, if it could be shown that there really isn't, and that's what I'm hearing, and I believe that there isn't, can another number be adopted? Because it's kind of like there's this vision of 358 lots that we can have a lot more homes for. Right. If the real number is only 58 or 28 or 8, that gives a whole different meaning to what's going to be implemented to deal with that much development. So how do you change that number? That's my question. If you can prove it, another number, how do you change it? And instantly, it's admirable that the consultants had, in effect, admitted a bias when they said, we don't know what it is, but just to err on the conservative side, we're going to say it's a lot more than it probably is.
Yes.
Maybe that's not a fair statement, but that's what I understood from it.
Mm-hmm.
Then the last question is, there's some parcels that are already approved have building envelopes, but the approved building envelopes may be in the stream ordinance. Is the county going to let you move those envelopes without going through a whole new process because it's a result of a county ordinance from something that was previously approved that's preventing it from being approved today.
Is it an approved structure that you're talking about?
Well, there are parcels that when they were subdivided had building envelopes. So
By building envelope, you mean the frame of the building itself?
Yeah, say it's a 5-acre parcel and they say, yeah, you can have a 5-acre parcel, but you gotta build it in this exact spot.
Yeah.
If that exact spot now happens to be within the SCA, can it be moved? Or do you have to go through a whole new process?
Is the building there? in your
No
question?
building there. I'm just talking about envelopes that were to be, when it was built in the future. And I'm thinking specifically of some of the Sky Ranch parcels. They all had building envelopes, pretty much all of them. And most of the remainder lots were not built upon. So what happens when they come in and ask for a building?
It's a good question. I mean, to some degree, it seems like at that level of when those building envelopes were set was a planning level or a zoning level effort, and then designation, and then now you've got, and if nothing has been built, it also stands to reason that when, at the time you go to build something, it's going to have to comply to current code. Sorry. So, Tom, did you want to add in?
Exactly correct. Development will need to comply with regulations in place at the time you seek permits to build. Building codes change every 3 years. There are exceptions to that general rule. If there is a vested right to that particular building envelope with a particular design, then under the laws, you can expect to proceed under the rules in place at the time you acquired those vested rights. But that really applies to a very narrow set of development projects. The one project I do want to point out is a good example of the county approving building envelopes that's in the stream conservation area. It's the Spirit Rock master plan from the 80s. And a number of years ago, there was actually an amendment to that master plan because of Spirit Rock's desire to move some of those buildings farther away from the creek, even though the original master plan allowed them to be much closer to the creek. And that's an example of how we've learned a lot more about what our best practices of development near creeks that we did then 30 years ago. Thank you.
Thanks.
You mentioned that our property values will go down. What about our homes that we have now? How is that affecting, our property?
If you have a home now, how is it going to be affected by the SCA, the SCO?
Well, it's only really going to be affected if you are proposing to, say, put an addition in.
Or make a change?
Or make a change. Your existing building is going to be fine.
Well, like, what if it needs a new roof, or what if you wanted to
It's fine, as long as you're
remodel?
not changing the building footprint. I think probably from 2013, you could even go up. It's expanding horizontally beyond a certain square footage.
Got it.
Trigger the permit requirements.
So, how does that then affect our property values? That's what I'm not understanding. Are you talking about the homes that are not going to be able to be built?
I think that there's a lot of housing stock in the valley that's really small. Like my house was a cabin, I could tell, like before I got to it and before the owners before me. And they had added on some space and it was barely a 1-bedroom. So just getting that building to work as a 2-bedroom involved changing the envelope and making modest changes. And so, I think that there's just a level of taking like these cabins and these older structures which are composting and doing some modest level of improvements to make them more livable. And this building stock also has a service life of like 50 to 70 years, and we all know everything starts to compost as soon as you're done. So, there's just this regular cycle. But with the SCA, my concern is that this like distance from riparian, like how do you get 50 feet away from like woody anything in most of the valley? It's next to impossible. So I'm just, right now my understanding is that if you are within the setbacks and you're behaving by the rules, you can do additions in the buildable envelope in your property. But the way it's written in here, you would need to have like all this other level of environmental assessment just to do like when you're playing by the rules. So, I mean, I think that's like one example of where how it is right now, I think does work for regular homeowners. And if you want to develop a new parcel, like you should have to perform at a higher level of like scrutiny and review.
Yeah.
So I just like look at the balance of those two things, and I'm concerned about the vitality of the valley and people being able to like have families here.
Well, so what I'm understanding is that when you have these over the summer homes that were one time, used, and you want to expand them or do something, that's more what you're talking about. When you've got a house that's already been built, then it's probably not as affected.
Yeah, but I mean, it's like they brought up in the presentation, like doing a hot tub or a yard or a carport could trigger like a $15,000 environmental review, and at that point, you don't do it, right?
Got it.
And nobody does anything.
Yeah.
Rick?
Yeah, I was wondering, Tom, that at one time we brought up the idea of, or the request of grandfathering in existing structures. And I know we talked about that a couple years ago. Yeah, I'm not sure if there was anything that was decided about allowing that to happen.
Well, I think that discussion happened probably around the time we were developing the 2013 SC.
I believe it was, yes.
Going forward, we need to revisit, kind of the whole format of that ordinance. But generally speaking, we think that was a good ordinance. There may be some tweaks we can make to it. We do want to revisit our general plan policies and maybe revise and refine some of them to make sure they're very, very clear and can be clearly implemented. But typically, the concept of zoning is if you have something and the rules change, particularly in this county, we try to work with you to allow you to continue to keep that.
I think there was actually a date that was being looked at as far as homes that did illegal expansion. But if it was done prior to 1997 or whatever the date was, and that would be considered being able to be grandfathered in, providing it was up to code and that type of thing.
I've heard a lot of good comments tonight, and I would certainly encourage you to submit those as comments on the supplemental EIR. But really, these are comments that we need to hear from you, the commission needs to hear from you, and the board, as we dive into the next effort to adopt the expanded SCA ordinance. These are our territory. We visited before, and we're going to go back and revisit them again.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Let me see if I've got this right. It's 358. They're basing the impact for how the restrictions that are going to come down the pipe, right?
Right.
Okay. So if they're all over you for a teeter-totter, and in my property, I can't put anything to keep my mother from falling into the 15 feet down into the creek, they want us to believe that it's possible that 358 parcels are going to be, are going to be developed?
No.
Or could be?
Yes, they say that it could be developed. They are potentially developed buildable lots.
Isn't that something that we should?
That question has arisen, and if it were practical for some entity or some group of individuals to go out and inspect all 358 of these lots and determine whether they were legally buildable or practically buildable, that would be a great asset. But that's a lot of work, and even then, someone can say, you say it's not buildable, but I say it is.
I'm talking about the consciousness behind doing it that way.
But they decide they have to draw a line somewhere.
I think it's something people ought to write in about.
Yes, this is something that should be written into as comments.
You're speaking about the methodology of the way they assess the potential development.
Yes, because these are punitive restrictions that we've got now.
I think that what they're looking at the 2007 countywide plan. They're looking at the rules and regulations that the 2007 countywide plan outlines, and they're saying we have to look at all the potential development that could happen per what the 2007 countywide plan would stipulate, including the stream setback requirements that were as part of the original 2007 countywide plan, and what effect that would have. And in a sense, I think the consultant Stillwater was just obligated to try to project that development based on the level of information, the level of analysis that they disclosed that they did. And
that's a nice explanation, but that's not even close to what's going to really happen.
Well, that's
I mean, if you can't
a
put
big
in
point.
a hot tub, you think they're going to let somebody take my money property? It's sad that that guy tried so hard to build a teeny little house, and he couldn't get anything done, and nobody is. There's going to be no new building in the valley. That's a pipe dream.
That's a comment that needs to be answered. Would you put that into the?
Yes, sir, I will.
Follow her model.
I would also like them to prove that 100 feet is a logical distance. Where did the 100 feet from a creek come from? What's the, I think it was originally designed to be rural, out in the woods, therefore you should be 100 feet. But when it comes to urban living, we're just about urban living. I don't know, I would like to ask, Tom, do you know that question, the answer?
It's a whether you agree with it or not. It's a scientific.
I can respond to that.
Okay.
I had that same question while reading the report, and all that the report says is that the 100-foot setback is referenced and supported by numerous scientific, entities, studies, background recommended by lots of different history of ecologists and fish biologists and whatnot that have studied these things. But also, interestingly, in what I put in this 5-page handout is that the 2009 Salmon Enhancement Plan that Stillwater also worked on has an entire few-page section where they actually explain that they believe a 35-foot setback is appropriate for an area that's already fairly developed with constrained lots. Like if you think about railroad and wooding, you're hemmed in by a road on one side, you're hemmed in by the stream on the other, and you've got small, skinny lots. So that's an applicable situation. And they didn't bring any of that discussion of that 35-foot setback into their SEIR that we're talking about tonight. So that's a question that I have too.
Do you have a comment on that?
Yeah, I was wondering whether Tom would know when they actually when did they come up with this 100-foot? I mean, my wife and I have a house that's built in, I think, 1961, and we're totally in the SCA. Our house is, if you take 100 feet, it will take everything but the garage in the SCA. Now, obviously, the SCA, I'm making an assumption, but it probably wasn't 100 feet back when the house was built. So why all of a sudden are people that are being penalized by a setback that's affecting property that's already been built?
A couple of things I wanted to mention in response to that. First of all, the SCA is not a setback in the sense of a building setback to a property line. When you want to add on or build, we have zoning rules that says you have to be X feet from your property line. It is an environmental buffer. And my take is that buffer is not necessarily a no-build zone. The origins of the 100-foot stream conservation area actually date back to the county's first general plan from 1973. That time it was actually envisioned that the buffer be upwards of, I think, 300 or 500 feet. Every 10 years or so, we update the general plan, and I believe it's the 84 general plan that the 100-foot was actually nailed down as the stream conservation area. That again was carried into the 94 general plan. In fact, I believe there was a program in the 94 general plan to adopt an SCA ordinance. That too, over time, kind of morphed into the 2007 plan. We have an SCA ordinance. I've said that many, many times. The challenge is the SCA ordinance is not applied evenly across all the different types of zoning districts that we have in the county. And secondly, we know a lot more about fish ecology, and there are things right now that one can do without any regulation that are potentially harmful to fish, particularly impervious surfaces. If you remember in the 2003 ordinance, we tried to strike a balance between what you can reasonably do, you know, whether that's I remember, you know, the carrot garden or a dog shed, things in the backyard that can probably be done if you abide by what we call standard management practices, which are best management practices supported by science. That's a way to allow reasonable, fish-friendly development. The county doesn't envision a no-build zone. You know, that position is not shared by all, but at least that is reflected in the 2007 general plan policies. For purposes of this document, we can't change that rule because, as Coho mentioned, we're looking back at the effects of the 2007 countywide plan, and the 100-foot stream conservation area is part of that plan. Short of the Board of Supervisors amending that plan to change that buffer, that is locked as a baseline, if you will, for this study.
But if that is the 100-foot setback, you're saying that under certain circumstances you can build within that area.
Yes, it's a buffer.
And the SCO will allow that if it's properly done.
That's what the general plan policy said. In fact, the law is entirely encumbered by the SCO ordinance. What choice is available for the county short of buying the property? You know, if the policy, if that regulation strips the property owner of all reasonable use of the property. That's why there is flexibility built into the general plan policies for exceptions. It's also that flexibility and the exceptions that's the cause of a lot of opposition from those on the other side who don't necessarily agree with that.
So there is no set rule yet? There is no set rule on that?
It's a buffer. Right now it's a buffer that's applied unevenly across the valley. It depends on the zoning district and what you're doing. And what we were trying to do with the 2013 ordinance is, as I call it, level the playing field so everybody works under the same set of regulations. There's some predictability. You know, it doesn't cost too much. You know, we're looking for ways to assist with conducting those biological assessments. In fact, one of the positive outcomes of that effort was the county committed to support the Resource Conservation District in developing a stream ombudsperson or stream coordinator program. In fact, that person is sitting right here next to me, Sarah Phillips. So it's part of the education and the positive aspects of what the county is trying to do holistically. Regulation is only one part of the strategy.
And you probably are aware that we were all very supportive of the 2013 county-wide plan. But now you're going to be adopting something new. Can I make the assumption that a lot of what was the 2013 will probably be carried over and then therefore will be part of the 2018?
As I said before, I think there's a lot of things that work well with the 2013 SCA ordinance. Our charge going forward is to revisit that ordinance, make tweaks to it, you know, address those areas of deficiency, if you will, make sure the approach lines up with the general plan policies. That's why as we approach the next update, you know, we update our general plan every 10 years or so. The first kind of high priority topic for the county is to pursue, you know, revisiting the SCA and adopting the expanded SCA ordinance. We will be going to, our staff, will be developing a work program and getting approval from the board, hopefully before the end of this calendar year. And I encourage you to participate and provide comments on that effort. And work to update the countywide plan will probably be initiated in early 2018. And the SCA ordinance at the same time.
Wow, yeah. Bob Densmore. Yeah, you heard? Yeah.
I think most of the people in the valley would like to do the right thing for the fish and to have healthy streams. And it's a financial issue. The impact of this is really the issue, not doing the right thing, I think, for most of us. And this ordinance is set up for the whole county so that it's to the benefit of the whole county. what can be done so that the cost of this is spread out through the whole county instead of impacting just a small group of people? I think it's unreasonable. You know, if I want to have clean air, I can't tell you not to drive a car. I mean, or it seems like these financial impacts really should be spread out for everybody in the county, not just a small group. So what can be done to change the cost of all these permits and all?
Especially since the reason that we have an issue with the fish is that they built the dams to provide water for the entire county. And so they reduced 50% of the spawning grounds. And so 100% of the county got the benefit of the water, and we got the benefit of having to fight for the fish.
Once the rest of the county can build right up to the water. In Belvedere, they're right up to the water. There's the house, there's the water.
There's also an issue of house property values mentioned. And it used to be, like 30 years ago, Fairfax and San Geronimo Valley were pretty much on par, the same value for the same size house. Maybe you can correct me on that, but it's not that way anymore. And there began to be a big difference when people couldn't build in the valley anymore, especially near streams. So there's already a financial impact, even if you don't change anything in your house. Just there have been so many foreclosures in the valley that it's just had a big impact. So we're already impacted.
Also, State Farm and Allstate and some of the major insurance companies would like to get rid of the entirety of homeowners insurance in this valley. And a lot of us have been affected by that with no significant claims, not missing a payment for 35 years. And that's also a community. I mean, that's another thing.
That particular thing is affecting anybody who's in a forest, regardless of whether there's a stream conservation ordinance or anything. Forests and potential mudslides, those kinds of things. Insurers are just cutting their risk. There's not much we can do about that. Anne, you had a question?
Yes, I just want to say that I'm really grateful you're all here. We're going to continue with our emails. We'll email out the SEER analysis that we had, as well as the action sheet. And we might give some points for comments, but it's better if you use your own words. And one of my questions as a homeowner on a creek is, what is the county doing, or the county council doing in preparation for the countywide plan and the SCA ordinance? Are they going to be protecting us? And we are targeted, and I'm 80% chance we're going to get sued, no matter what we do. And what is the county going to do to counteract that? So that would be one of my comments.
Thank you. Question, anyone else? Or someone over Liz again?
Yeah, Liz again. I just have one more comment, and I think that the Stewards maybe could plan some workshops where we take one issue, get a committee of people to go out and figure out some answers to the one issue of the SEIR, and so that we can educate each other about what we've read and what we know and all of that kind of stuff.
You'll be involved with that? Yes?
Sure. Yeah.
We do that already, and we'll continue.
We had Judith's campaign did a thing on septic,
Yeah.
Which could very much be succeeded in that kind of very
Rick?
Yeah, Liz, that was I'm going to jump on what you just said. We have a real good crowd here tonight. Thank you all for coming. And we all consider everybody here as stewards, San Geronimo Valley stewards. But to try to do what you're suggesting requires everybody to get involved. And we're basically a very small nucleus of people that get together every once in a while and try to figure out what we can do to get communication out to you